back to part 2 of chapter 5, all about Russia and the near abroad. Next, we're going to talk about population distribution. Um, so, a couple of things. There is intensive agriculture and high populations only in arable lands, particularly in this fertile triangle that happens right here, right? We only have a very small part of the region that is really suitable for intense agriculture. And so one of the reasons that Ukraine is so desirable is that it was the breadbasket of the USSR. Lots and lots of food was grown there. And so again, you can see most of the population is in these areas that are can support intensive agriculture. We look at demographic trends in the region. Um, excuse me. The Slavic states like Belarus, Moldova, Russia, and Ukraine, they have a higher human development index, negative rate of natural increase, as opposed to those poorer countries in Central Asia, which have a much higher rate of natural increase. Still not a super high one, but a pretty high one, and a much lower rate of on the Human Development Index. We have much more urbanization in the Slavic states and in Moldova, much less urbanization in Central Asia. The Russian cross is a phenomenon by where in Russia at one point there were more deaths than births. So this population growth, this line crossed over, and this happened after the collapse of the USSR in 1991. Healthcare became much less available. So people were having much less children. There was a lot of poverty during that economic restructuring. There was also a lot of alcoholism, drugs, and prostitution. It wasn't a very healthy country at the time, and so this led to there being just more deaths than there were births, and the population was not being replenished by immigration. So again, when you have a country that is economically unstable, you're not going to have many people wanting to come in for work. And those lines have recently recrossed, where now we're getting more births and deaths, and they're starting to have population growth again. The economy of the region, they have lots of mineral resources, oil, gas, diamonds, etc. Russia has an incredible amount of natural gas, but these are mostly in Russia and in the Caspian Sea. And as oil prices go up, so does the economy. So Russia's economy is very, very susceptible to international oil prices. Heavy industry in that fertile triangle, not much agriculture in the region as a whole, again, only in that fertile triangle. It's in many ways it's considered a misdeveloped country, so that post-communist wealth was really put into the hands of very, very few people. So you have some people in Russia who are extraordinarily wealthy, but lots of other people who are not. So we can think of it as an oligarchy and a kleptocracy. Very few, just really, really rich people, though. There's been a recent recession, and the currency has been devalued, which has been hard for Russia on the international stage, especially as those prices of oil have dropped. And so we can see there was a lot of sanctions against Russia after their intervention into Ukraine. So we can see here Russia annexes Crimea over here. There's sanctions, and now that coupled with the devalue of crude really has hurt the Russian economy. There's lots of questions about oil in the Caspian Sea. One is who owns it, right? Which country actually kind of has ownership over this oil that is in that sea? How do you get that oil out to the ocean? There are several pipelines in the area, which is one of the reasons that it kind of encourages countries like Azerbaijan and Georgia to cooperate with one another, because Azerbaijan needs Georgia's help to get its oil to the Black Sea and then out to the Mediterranean. It's caused political tensions in other places like Armenia. Something else we're going to talk about is a little bit of environmental degradation in the area. Cotton was grown heavily in Central Asia. There's good soil there, but there's almost no rain. And cotton as a crop is very, very water intensive. And so the USSR did irrigation projects that enabled cotton farming. And so all the rivers flowing to the Aral Sea, which is this inland sea, were diverted for these irrigation projects. And so the Aral Sea's source of water was removed. Um, Uzbekistan, which is there, was the number one cotton exporter for years. And so if we look at what happened to the Aral Sea now, it is much, much smaller than it used to be. And so they're trying to restore parts of it, but an entire fishing economy was ruined in that area because that sea completely dried up. And this sea again was like the size of San Diego County. It was remarkably large. Climate change is actually predicted to have some kind of unique effects in the area. So we have melting permafrost. The Arctic is heating up really fast, much faster than other places on the planet. And so that Siberian permafrost is melting and it's releasing methane, which causes this feedback loop where then you get more climate change. There's the melting permafrost in Yakutsk. So what happens is this ground that is traditionally frozen, when it thaws, the integrity of the ground is compromised and then it sinks. And so you have places like this where buildings just collapse because their foundations are now on this very unstable ground. The Arctic Ocean ice pack is melting. And so could climate change be good for Russia? This is actually one of the exercise that you have to do for this module because it could give easier access to mineral resources, easier agriculture, and shorter shipping lanes. Remember, most of those rivers that flow in Russia flow to the Arctic, and right now they're frozen. Um, and they're also suffering from fewer oil exports right now. So if we want to look at here is Russia right now. There's Murmansk, which is a port, um, and here is Tokyo. And so the old route that you would have to take to get your goods from Murmansk to Tokyo was to go all the way around this way, right? All the way around India. And if that ice goes away, now you have this new route that is significantly shorter to get your goods to Asia. We have some severe concentrations of power in the region. Um, so we think about the government. Boris Yeltsin was the first president of post-communist Russia, and the next one was Vladimir Putin. The next president after Vladimir Putin was Dmitry Medvedev, and he named Vladimir Putin as his prime minister, which is like his vice president. And then Putin was elected again, and now Medvedev is prime minister again. So it's really not a change of power. It's pretty much agreed that Putin was kind of ruling the whole time. And so those nationalist policies under Putin are very, very popular. There is a picture of Putin. We'll talk a little bit more about Putin a little later in this lecture. And then in business, you have lots of poverty, but you also have lots of billionaires. You have these giant conglomerates that control single industries, and this is kind of a legacy of state-run industries, right? It was at a time that the state controlled all the oil, all of the mining, all of this. And so when communism collapsed there, you just had individuals who took over those industries. Um, and so there's a man here, Mikhail Prokhorov, who now lives in the U.S., I believe, actually. But his family controls the nickel mining in Russia, and he is an extraordinarily wealthy person who's also fairly heavily allied with Vladimir Putin. And so I want to talk for a second about why is Putin so popular. We, in the United States, he's often pictured as this really bad guy who suppresses the press, who he's had people murdered. But he really just has this kind of persona in the country of this person who saved the Russian economy and who defends Russia. And so he controls the media. So, the pictures of him that come out in the media are just that he is this very, very strong Russian leader. And if you look at the economy, like this also gave him a lot of power because here's when Boris Yeltsin came into power. So you have the collapse of the USSR here. Boris Yeltsin comes into power. The economy is really doing terribly. Vladimir Putin comes into power and it goes up and up. And a lot of this had to do more with oil than it actually had to do with Vladimir Putin. And so when you think about how Vladimir Putin is portrayed in the media, he is a former KGB agent, so very James Bond-esque. He drives race cars. He rides motorcycles. He plays hockey. He knows judo. He hang glides. He swims in partially frozen Siberian lakes. He helps with tiger conservation. Here he is, I think, harpooning a whale in order for it to be tagged for something for conservation, not to kill it. Here he is participating in some other polar bear conservation thing. Here he is exploring the sea in an underwater submersible. Um, Here he is. This one here is one of my favorites. A news crew just happened to be there when he just happened to go scuba diving and discover these amazing artifacts that nobody had ever discovered before. Here he is feeding baby animals. Here he is having tea with a little girl and playing the piano. So that Russian propaganda machine really works as a mechanism just to promote how amazing Putin is, and he's very well liked by his people. There was even a pop song that was extraordinarily popular a couple years ago about women singing about how they need a man like Putin. And again, his kind of defense of Russia against the West is just this very common narrative there. Here is the Russian bear defending the Ukraine against the United States. This is that Russian bear again catching the EU and the United States pilfering Ukraine's wealth, as they have done with Libya and Syria and Iraq, according to them. And here is Vladimir Putin outsmarting this is Angela Merkel, I believe, who is the head of Germany, Barack Obama, and I think this is supposed to be David Cameron, who used to be ruler of the UK, right? That he is basically this person who's just standing up to these Western countries. But he's also done some, very terrible and awful things. Like I said before, has definitely had people assassinated, including those who have spoke out against him. He last year approved a legal change that decriminalizes some domestic violence, and some of the stuff that was written about it is basically because, a woman will know that she is really loved if her man beats her. Um, he's passed laws banning what he deems as gay propaganda. So really anything that talks about the LGBT community, you could potentially be arrested for that. And so when we look at the democracy index here with, green countries considering to be very democratic and dark red ones not, right? Russia is not considered to be the most democratic of places. He's also appeared very often in our news lately. There are concerns that our current administration is too closely aligned with Putin, which has been just complete fodder for Saturday Night Live. That he feared it interfered in our election, and he has interfered with elections around the world. He kind of has this goal to destabilize the West and kind of break apart that NATO alliance between Europe and the United States as a way to just kind of expand his power. So that is the end of Chapter 5, Part 2. You have a map quiz this week. Don't forget about your country journal.